Okay, my YouTube people, this is how to troubleshoot and fix a problem with a Homelite generator that has a Subaru motor on it, so follow along. Now, I did a carb job on this generator a couple years ago, and the one recommendation I always give with anything that sits for a long time is you have to run it out of gas. Now, here's a valve right here. The valve says off. I'm not wondering if my neighbor didn't realize that the valve was turned off and didn't get any fuel in the carb, and that's why it wouldn't start. Not really sure, but anytime you have any equipment like this that's going to sit for a long period of time, gas will gum up in the carburetor, especially today with the ethanol fuels. So I make sure to run them completely out. If I don't run it out, I drain it out. You can drain it right out by taking this hose off or taking it off on the other side of the valve, swinging it over and putting it back in your gas can. And if you're not comfortable with using that gas, maybe it's been sitting for 3 months or so, then just pour it in your car. It will burn in your car. So that way you don't have to get into any kind of disposal issues. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull the air cleaner off. You can see that it's still brand new and clean. The oil that you see on the filter is air filter oil. You want to make sure you put some kind of oil, even if it's motor oil, on your air filter before it sees any kind of use, because a lot of times they come dry and they need the oil to catch the dirt. So the first thing I'm going to do after pulling the air filter is just check to see how much gas is in here. And there is some gas in there, but it doesn't look like much. And it don't smell really bad. You have to trust on these that when you go to use them, even though it's been sitting for maybe 2 or 3 years, if you don't put gas in them, all you got to do is put gas in and start it. You have to trust that fact that it's going to start. Don't leave them sit with gas in it. It's just that simple. And when you're done, like I said, drain the gas out. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to give the oil a quick check. Yeah, you can see it looks like it's been run, but the oil is really clean. My guess is the only run time that this oil has on it is when I drained it out of gas after I repaired it. If you do have to change the oil, here's the oil drain right here, and then you just fill through where the dipstick is. Another thing you should check on these is the spark arrestor. If they've been running for a while, that screen can easily get clogged up, and you could take and soak it in some solvent to clean it, or if not, you just have to buy a new one. Next thing I'm going to do is remove the drain off of the bowl and see if it has bad gas in it. This generator is a Subaru motor, and this happens to be an 8mm, and of course you got to have some kind of catch pan below it. I just take an old jug of oil and cut it out, and it makes for a good catch pan for this kind of work. The fuel kind of smells like turpentine, so I'm guessing that's the issue right there. Now I think what I'm going to do with this is I think I'm going to open the fuel valve and make sure fuel's flowing, and you can see that it is. I'm going to try and get out as much as I can. And then what I'm going to do is put some fresh fuel in this one, and I think it'll start. As you can see, the fuel pickup's over here on this back corner of the tank. So I make sure to lift the front a little higher than the back, but it all slopes towards the pickup so I can get most of it out. And as you can see, it's still draining. This is the fuel stabilizer I use. It's made by Stable, and it says effective in all ethanol blended fuels. And then it says usage directions. 1 ounce treats up to 2.5 gallons. I definitely don't have that much in here. I'll put about a ½ ounce in. I don't even think there's a full gallon. Of course, don't fool with gas if you don't have good ventilation. I think that's a given. I just poured some of the fresh fuel with the Stable in it, and I'm letting it come down and get through the carburetor. You can kind of see now it doesn't look yellow like what was coming out before. So now I'll just shut the fuel off. Now that it's slowed down, I'll put the drain plug back in. I'm going to put the air filter back in also. Sometimes they run these so lean that they won't run right without an air filter. So it's important that you get that back on. So after pulling this thing about 10 times, I did pull the spark plug and check that I do have spark, because some of these will have a low oil cutoff. If you're low on motor oil, it'll cut the spark off so you don't ruin the engine. Now I shut the fuel off, and I'm going to pull the carburetor off. This is a 10mm. A lot of these use the exact same carburetor. Not sure that you can see that, but I did use Loctite last time I put this nut on, and I highly suggest that, because if this nut comes loose and goes into the carburetor, it's going to be a bad day for the motor. I'm going to keep the spare parts in the air filter cover. That way I don't lose any of them. You can see where this nut has Loctite on it also. So that's the crankcase breather hose. The hose down here goes to the gas tank. That way any vapors that come off get sucked back into the motor. There's also a nut here to remove the cover. Here's the carburetor here. I'll pull the fuel line next. Give it a little wiggle. Break it loose. Now you want to pay close attention. You have a spring that goes in the hole behind where the throttle goes in. And these can be a little tricky to get off. That comes out. And now the spring comes off. I'll show you what that looks like. Here it is. The back hole that goes into the metal is where the spring went, and the one with the rubber bushing is where the throttle went. This is your choke, so that's how your choke closes and choke opens. First thing I'm going to do is drain the carburetor. I can smell that that's the fresh fuel. This is a standard Mikuni carb. It's a 13 millimeter to take the bowl nut off. Thankfully, since this was put together not too long ago, the gaskets are staying in good shape. And there you have it. That's the problem. You see this? This is what happens when you use ethanol gas. See that? It's like sand down in there. That's why it wouldn't run. Look at all that. It's like clumps of it. You can also see how it discolored the bottom of the bowl a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tap the float pin out. You have to be very careful when you do this because it's real easy to break one of these aluminum studs. Okay, that pin's out. You can see the threads on the nut are kind of gooed up a little. Now I'll pull the float out. Okay, so this float's not going to come out until you remove the jet. Now I'll pull the main jet out. And it's half plugged with the goo, I can see that. The float just comes off and you have to watch the needle. Needle has a rubber tip. This will all need to be cleaned. It'll need to be cleaned down in here. I can see some goo down in there. Down in here you can see that brass nozzle sticking up. That brass nozzle comes down into here. And hopefully I can get that out and just push it down. That'll give me the opportunity to clean this. Right here and here are two air bleeds. And they'll need to be cleaned out real good. Also, I like to take a razor blade and clean anything that's off on here on this flat surface, like that. And I already cleaned some of that off. There's an O-ring gasket right here that I'm going to leave alone because sometimes if you disturb them, they won't go back in. And I'm trying not to have to buy parts on this. First thing I'm going to do to get that nozzle out is use this flat part of this screwdriver on it. And just give it a little push. So it doesn't really want to come out. I'm not going to force it. Best carb cleaner I found is the Gum Out 2+2. It used to be called, now they just call it carb and choke cleaner and parts cleaner. But this Gum Out is the best I've ever found. I'm going to spray down into each one of these air bleeds. That one seems to be clogged. You can see that one's coming out the main jet. So that's for the air, for the emulsions. Okay, now I'm lined up on this one. And I don't know if you can see that or not. I'll try it again where you can see it. But it comes out these, there's 3 or 4 holes down in that carburetor right there for idle. And I could see it coming out those when I have that in there right. I'm not sure if you're going to see it. Hopefully you can see that. So that's good and clear now. Now I'm going to spray through here. I know fuel's coming through, but just to give it a clean, I'll spray back the other way. Fuel's coming through there. Now I'm going to take my time and really spray here. I don't think this is plugged off. I don't think anything comes out of there, but let's kind of give it a little spray in here. Spray down there real quick. It's important to hit these with compressed air. I'll do that off camera. I'm going to use some of this carb cleaner to wipe the bowl out. It's very important to get all this dirt out. It has to be really clean. So that's pretty good there. And then I'm just going to spray down through both of these holes a little bit. I also want to clean these threads real good because they're really dirty. And that'll end up right back in the carburetor. So you can see all that came off of it. Also, I'm going to take the float and just give it a wipe. And take it and wipe down in a little bit just to make sure it's good and clean. That looks good. Wipe the float pivot pin. Be delicate with the needle, but I'll just give it a little wipe. It doesn't really have anything on it, and I replaced that last time I built this rebuilt this carburetor. And now the main jet. The other thing I do with these main jet is I have these wire tag wires, and I like to put one through there just to make sure that it's good and clean. I want to make sure, like, this stuff can soot up kind of. Just want to make sure you get that off real good. And now I can see through it really clear, so that's good. Let's go and give it a little wipe, try and get some of that green off of it, and it comes right off with the carb cleaner. You can see that's a lot better looking there. I always like to get a pick and kind of go down in there and make sure there's no crusty stuff in there. I did blow it out, looks pretty good. And there's also a hole that leads over into this oblong section here. And I'll just take and put that in there, and the pick in there. It fits in fine. I also like to take my paper tag wire, just kind of stick it down in there also. Make sure it goes in pretty deep, good, and it does. And then I'm going to try and spray the carb cleaner down into that hole best I can. Okay, that hole's nice and open also. Then you make sure you blow that out with air real good. This is your mixture screw. I had already adjusted this, so I'm not going to readjust it. It should be fine. If you do want to take it out, you can. But I already, like I said earlier, there's 3 holes here. I'm thinking you can see that now. And then there's the one hole where the mixture screw is. And when I sprayed down this air bleed right here, I saw fuel come out of, or I saw the carb cleaner come out of all 3 of those. So I know they're open. Now I'm going to put this carburetor back together. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the needle back on the float. And then I'm going to put that, I'm going to set it like so and get that needle lined up to go down in there like that. Now I'm going to put my carburetor pin back in. This pin has a flat side right up here on top. I'm not sure you could see that on camera, but I'm going to push it in like this. And then I'll just give it a little push with the pliers. Not much, just barely comes out the other side, and the float bowl will stop it from doing anything funny. Now I'm going to put the main jet back in. I'm going to put the bowl back on, and I'm going to make sure that the bowl drains in the same position it was before I took it off, which was right where you see it. Now the bowl drain back on. Now the carb's back together. I'm going to put it on the generator. Choke goes out. Throttle goes in. Sits on there like that. First thing I'm going to do is put that spring back on. Now I'll put the throttle arm back on that goes over to the governor. Slides in there like that. Make sure it's free. And it is. Now I'm going to put the fuel line back on. And the clamp. And there's the clamp. And now the back air filter cover. Of course, some blue Loctite on the threads. Don't want to be cheap with that. You don't want that nut going into the motor. A little blue on the bolt for the bottom of the cover. Okay, now if they're tight, I'm going to put the air filter back in it. Put the vent bracket back on the the stud for the carburetor. Get the vent in the air breather. Now I'll open the fuel and give it a start. Okay, now I'll turn the fuel on. And I would expect it to start within 2 to 3 pulls. I put the choke on. there you have it. I ran this thing about 10 minutes. It runs good. It hunts around a little bit when there's no load on it, but I did put a load on it and it smooths right out. After that, what I did was I shut the fuel off. I let it run. And as it starts to die out, I give it a little more choke, give it a little more choke, and then that'll drain the bottom of the bowl out. But the last thing I do before I put it away is I want to make sure that the bowl is completely drained. And you can see there was still a little left in there. Now the other thing I'll do is I'll tip it towards the drain, see if any more comes out. You can see there's some more drops that do. Now that fuel that's in there does have the stabilizer in there, but I still don't want to trust it because it could be years before this thing's ran again. Now I'll put the bowl drain nut back in knowing that it's empty. And that's it. It can be stored long term without any worries. And please don't forget to like and subscribe.